There are 19 keys on the ring they handed me. This building has 18 locks. I counted both in my second week, on a slow night, the way you do when a thing sits wrong in your hand. 11 floors of corridor doors that don't lock. A boiler room, a shop, a laundry, a trash room, a meter room, an elevator machine room, a storage cage, my own basement door, 4 mechanical closets, a roof hatch, 2 street doors, a freight door on the alley, the gate on the areaway, and a padlock on the standpipe room. 18. There's a mezzanine door too, on Dolan's key and not mine, and I don't count it, because it isn't mine, and it never will be. 18. I ran it 3 separate times and got 18 every time, and the ring kept saying 19. My name's Wes Corrigan. I do nights here, 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and I was 6 weeks in when this started. The job comes with a basement unit. The basement unit is the address printed on a custody agreement that lets me have my daughter every other Sunday, so I am not a man who makes noise about a key. I wrote it in the log as an inventory error and went back to work. The ring wasn't new. It belonged to Elston Ware before me. He ran this building 40 years, more or less, and then he died in March, and nobody recut anything or rekeyed anything or wrote anything down. Rudy, the day man, wiped the tag off with his thumb in the lobby and handed me the whole work still warm from his pocket. That's how I got hired. A man stopped, and the building needed the next set of hands. Most of the keys are stamped with what they open. Boiler, roof, laundry. Somebody with a punch set did it years ago and did it well, and I appreciated that more than I expected to. The odd one is stamped, too. It reads 611. There's no 611. The 6th floor runs 601 through 610. The elevator panel says so. The mailbox bank in the lobby says so. And if you get out on 6 and walk it, you'll count 10 doors, and then you'll be at the end of the hall, looking at plaster. I sat with that key under the shop lamp for a while that night, because it was a slow night, and because I had nothing else to be wrong about. 2 things about it. The stamping was done by the same hand as the rest. Same punch set, same depth of strike, same slight lean to the left on every character, which is what you get when a man sets a key on an anvil and hits it with the same tired wrist 18 times in one sitting. 611 wasn't added later by somebody being funny. 611 was stamped on the same afternoon as boiler and roof by a man who believed in all 3 the same amount. The other thing was the wear. A key polishes where a thumb and a finger pinch it, and that one was bright on the bow and rounded on the shoulder, brighter than roof, and I go to the roof twice a week. That is not a dead key off a dead woman's house. That is a key somebody turned thousands of times. That's what I had in my hand, and I still wrote inventory error in the log, because the other thing you learn on nights is which questions cost money. I asked Rudy about it while he was eating his lunch out of a paper sack. "Buildings collect keys," he said. "Elston had his mother's house on there for 9 years after she passed." That was a good enough answer, and I took it, because it was a good enough answer. I'd taken a lot of those since March. The notice went up in the lobby that same week, taped over the panel where the fire inspection card lives. Sprinkler retrofit, existing building, and they were starting on 6, because 6 is the floor with the original corridor plaster and the shortest run to the standpipe. The crews would open the corridor walls on the Monday. That gave everybody 12 days to move their bikes out of the hallway. I read it twice and thought about what it meant for my punch list, which is the whole distance my thinking traveled at that point. Here's the part of the job nobody tells you. On nights, in a building this old, you don't fix things so much as listen to them. Steam heat on vertical risers, one branch off to each unit, and the whole system talks. You learn what a stack sounds like when it's balanced, and what it sounds like when there's air in it. And after a while, you can stand in a stairwell and tell which side of the building is unhappy. Elston knew this place by hand for 4 decades. I was trying to learn it in a season, which is how I found the wall. I was on 6, a little after 1 in the morning, chasing a hum somebody in 604 had complained about, and I put my hand flat on the east plaster at the end of the corridor to steady myself while I listened. Chest height. The plaster was warm. Not sun warm. There's no sun at 1 in the morning, and that's an interior wall besides. It was the temperature a wall gets when there's steam behind it, which I know by hand, the way you know a fever. Nothing on that wall carries heat. I know the riser layout because I bled every stack in the building my first month. The east run terminates at 610 and turns down. Past 610, there is nothing but the corner of the building and the rear service stair on the far side of it. And service stairs aren't heated in a building like this. They're just concrete and paint. I stood there with my hand on it long enough that my palm stopped being able to tell me anything, which is what happens. The next night, I bled the 6 stack properly, top down, and got a good clean take. Air out, water up, everything quiet. 2 nights after that, I bled it again out of habit, and it took air a second time. I want to explain why that mattered, because it's the whole thing. Air doesn't collect in a dead branch. A branch that has been isolated for 50 years is either drained or it's a solid column that never moves and never introduces anything. Air gets in a system where something is drawing. Somebody's opening a valve. Somebody's running water. Somebody's pulling on the line. A stack that takes air twice in a week is a stack with a customer. So I went looking for the customer, and I did it the dumb way, which is the only way I had. I took the ring up to 6 at midnight on a Thursday and walked it. Every door, every closet, every lock on that floor, 1 key at a time. And when 6 was done, I did 5 and 7 for spite. I'd get a key seated, feel it stop, back it out, and go to the next one. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, a woman in 602 opened her door in a bathrobe and asked if there was a problem, and I told her I was checking hardware, which is a true sentence that answers nothing. The 611 key didn't fit anything. Not 1 lock on that floor, not 1 lock in the building. I finished the ring at 10 of 5 with a strip of skin off my thumb knuckle and no punch list done. Dolan reads the punch list Tuesdays and Fridays at 7. He isn't a cruel man. He wrote me up because that's the form, and he had to note something in the reason field. And what he noted was that the overnight man spent a shift on an item not on the list. "You want to tell me what you were actually doing," he said, "chasing air in the 6 stack." He looked at the sheet for a second longer than he needed to, and then he signed it and put it in the folder, and that was the end of it. As far as either of us said out loud, Saturday. Rudy was in the alley with a sandwich, and I told him about the valve I'd repacked in the laundry because I wanted somebody to know I'd done something with my hands that week. Rudy laughed at me, friendly. Elston never touched wet. 40 years. Anything with water in it, he called somebody. I filed that as an old man, being particular about his trade, and I went down to sleep. It is the single most useful thing anybody said to me that month, and it took me 11 days to hear it. The change machine is what turned me. It's in the laundry, and emptying it is a Tuesday task, and it kept coming up empty on days that weren't Tuesday. Coins in, bills out, and the drawer light on the front reading low when nobody in this building does laundry after 10 at night, because I'd know. The machines are directly under my head. I started checking it at the end of every shift. Somebody was pulling quarters out of that machine between 2 and 4 in the morning, and it was not any of the 11 people I had ever seen awake in this building at that hour. The rear service stair runs the full height on the northeast corner. Tenants don't use it. I use it maybe twice a shift because it's faster than waiting on the elevator. On the 6th floor landing, I stopped and actually looked at it for the first time, which tells you something about 6 weeks of walking past a thing. The tread coming up to that landing was worn to bare wood on the wall side. Just that one tread, just the one side. The side where you'd put your foot if you were holding the rail with your right hand and going slow. Every other tread in that stairwell had the same tired paint. And there's a door on that landing. There's one on every landing. I'd logged them all as utility closets in my first week walkthrough, because that's what they look like. Flush steel, no number, painted the same gray as the block. The hinges on the 6th floor one were set to swing out into the landing, which is wrong for a closet and right for a room. The lock plate had oil on it. I got the ring out, and I already knew. I want to be honest about that. My hand knew before I did, because my hand had been on the warm plaster on the other side of that corner for 2 weeks. The key stamped 611 went in smooth and turned like it had been turned that day. The room was heated. That's the first thing, because it hit me in the face at 3:40 in the morning after 4 hours in a cold stairwell. I did not step through. I stood in the doorway, and I read it the way I read a boiler room before I touch anything in it. Left to right, low to high, a bed against the north wall, made up tight. The blanket folded back at the angle a person makes on purpose. A card table with 2 chairs, one pushed in and one left out. A hot plate on a milk crate with a kettle sitting on the burner. A shelf above it with cans on their sides so the labels faced out. A rug that used to be red. A lamp on the floor next to the bed with the shade turned toward the wall, so the light bounced off the plaster instead of falling into the room. A closet at the back, standing open, dark inside. Where the window should have been, there was plywood, set square into the frame and painted the same tired cream as everything else. Somebody had cut that panel to fit. From the alley, you would see a dark pane on the 6th floors and think nothing of it, because a building this old has 40 dark panes on any given night. The radiator under the boarded window was working. 5 sections of cast iron, and I could hear the water moving in it from where I stood. It was the last week of April. I had banked that boiler myself on the 14th and cut the risers back to a maintenance loop. There should not have been enough heat in that stack to warm a bathroom, and here was a full unit going like January. Then I heard the other thing, and it was the smallest thing in the room. The kettle was ticking. A kettle only does that while it is giving up heat. 2 minutes off the burner, and it ticks. 10 minutes off the burner, and it is quiet. I stood there, and I listened to it tick, and I understood that I was late by about the length of time it takes to walk down 1 flight of stairs. Nobody in the chairs, nobody in the bed. 10 doors on that floor. I'd counted them myself. So who made the bed? I closed the door. I turned the key back, and I felt the bolt seat. And when I took my fingers off the plate, they were slick. Not dusty. Somebody had oiled that lock recently enough that it had not dried, and it was 3 in the morning in a building where I was the only person with a can of oil. I went down the service stair with my boots off the tread edges, and I did not turn on a single light between the 6th floor and the basement. Here is the part that I would like to be able to leave out. I sat in the shop until my shift ended, and I went over 6 weeks in my head, and every single thing I had written on my punch list rearranged itself while I sat there. The change machine, for one. I had reported that twice. $40 in quarters loaded on a Sunday, empty by Wednesday, and Dolan told me the tenants were rocking it, or somebody had a slug. So I pulled it off the wall in my 3rd week and opened the bill box to look for slugs. And what was in there was 7 $1 bills, folded the long way. all 7 folded the same direction. A slug does not leave you money. Somebody was feeding singles into that machine and taking quarters out night after night. And the only reason a person converts cash to coin in a building like this one is a coin-operated washer. The rear stair runs from the 6th floor to the basement. The laundry is in the basement. I had been standing in the middle of the answer twice a shift for 6 weeks. The water for 2. The 6 stack pulled air back into it every time I bled it, which means the line kept losing pressure somewhere above the bleed point, which means somewhere above the bleed point, a tap was being opened and closed by a hand. And then the cans. There was a case of soup under my workbench. It was there when Rudy handed me the ring, along with about 9 other cases of things that had been under that bench since before I was born. And I had been eating out of it. 6 weeks of eating out of it. 2, sometimes 3 cans a week, warmed on the shop burner at 4 in the morning, because I am 14 months out of bankruptcy, and free soup is free soup. I counted what was left in the case that morning, 11 cans of the 24. I had been eating somebody's supply and calling it salvage, and the man who stocked it had been dead since March. I want to say I called somebody. I did not call anybody. Understand my situation, and you will not have to like me. My name is on a lease for a basement unit that comes with this job and disappears with it. My name is on a custody agreement that says I have my daughter every other Sunday at a fixed address, and a fixed address is the whole hinge of that document. The company that owns this building is a limited liability company in another state, with a mailing box for a face. And the only piece of it I can talk to is Dolan, and Dolan writes people up for being on floors their schedule does not put them on. He had already done it once. There was also this. I did not know what I had found. A room is not a crime. A person is not a crime either. If I picked up a phone and said there is a unit on 6 that does not exist and somebody is living in it, then the first thing that happens is not a rescue. The first thing that happens is a man with a clipboard, and then a locksmith, and then a new maintenance guy in my coveralls by the end of the week. So I did the thing I actually know how to do, which is to go back and look again. The next night the door was locked and the room had moved. The kettle had shifted 6 inches to the left. The cup on the card table was clean and upside down on a folded towel. The bed had been slept in and remade well, but the pillow was not sitting the way it had been sitting, and the closet door at the back, which had been open the first night, was shut. I stood in the middle of that rug, and I listened to a closet for a long time, and the closet listened back. You can feel that. A room with nobody in it has one kind of quiet, and a room with somebody holding still in it has a different kind. And anybody who has worked nights alone in an old building knows the difference, and usually talks themselves out of it. I did not open the closet. I want that on the record, for whatever a record is worth by now. What I did instead was fix the hot plate. The cord on it was cloth-wrapped and split back about 2 inches from the plug, with copper showing through, sitting on a wooden crate against a plaster wall in a building with no sprinklers above the 2nd floor until the following Monday. It would have gone up. Not maybe. That is the kind of thing that kills a person on the 6th floor of a building where nobody knows there is a 6th floor person to look for. So I went down, and I came back up with a new cord and a roll of tape, and I sat on the floor of a room I had no business in, and I rewired a hot plate for somebody I had never seen. Then I put a packing nut on the radiator valve because it had been weeping down the leg of the unit and staining the boards. 12 minutes of work, the 2 easiest jobs in the trade. Then I did the other thing, and I have to say it plainly, because there is no way to say it that makes it kind. I set a test. Everything in that room could be explained twice. A room could have been stocked and made up and forgotten. A kettle could have been left on a hot burner by a man who died in March, if you don't know what you know about kettles. I had been arguing with myself for 2 nights, and I was losing to myself, so I decided to ask a question the room would have to answer. I took a pencil out of my shirt and drew a line on the crate along the front edge of the kettle, so I would know to the 1/8 of an inch if it moved again. And I shut the heat off. Hand valve at the radiator all the way down. Snug. Anybody can turn that. It takes one hand and about 1.5 seconds, and either it would be open when I came back, or it wouldn't be, and I would know. Then I laid the old cord on the table so it would be plain the work had been done and by whom, and I folded the rag I'd been using into quarters and left it on the crate, and I locked the door behind me and went down and did the rest of my shift. It was 38 degrees that night. I checked it on the boiler room thermometer at 4 in the morning, which is a thing you only do if you already know you have done something you will have to answer for. 3rd night, the valve was open. That is the first thing I checked, and I did it from the doorway, on my knees, before I did anything else. Open, and only about a 1/4 turn, which is what a person does who is cold and does not want to be greedy. The rag I had folded was on the floor beside the radiator instead of the crate, and it had a smear on it, where a hand had used it on a handle that was too hot to hold. The kettle was back in front of my pencil line. Not on it, 1/2 inch shy of it, and squared up careful, which is worse, because it means somebody saw the line and understood what the line was, and put the kettle back anyway, and did not scrub the line off. The kettle was also full and cold. It had been filled and sat on a burner that was switched off, which is a thing you do when you are inviting somebody to make tea, and you are not certain enough to make it yourself. And my tools were stacked. I had left a pair of channel locks and a screwdriver on the crate, which was carelessness, and they were squared up in a row with the handles facing the door, and there was a fresh rag folded into quarters and set underneath them. I knelt down at the radiator with the flashlight in my teeth to check whether the packing had held, and it had, and I remember being pleased about that in the small, dumb way you get pleased about your own work. I was facing the wall. My back was to the room, and my back is just a canvas coverall with nothing written on it, because the patch with my name on it is sewn over my heart on the front, and it says, Corrigan. Behind me, a woman's voice, low and dry and completely unsurprised, said, "You've got the ring on the wrong nail, Wes." I did not jump. I want to be honest about that, because it would be a better story if I had. What I did was take the flashlight out of my teeth and set it down on the boards, still lit, pointed at the wall, so the room stayed the same brightness it had been. Then I turned around on my knees like a man who has been caught doing something, which is what I was. She was standing in the closet doorway with one hand on the jamb, small, 70 or near it. Gray hair cut short and cut badly, the way you cut it yourself in a mirror over a long stretch of years. Cardigan buttoned wrong by one button, wool socks and no shoes, because a person who lives above 10 other apartments learns not to wear shoes. She looked at me the way you look at a repair that has finally been done right. "You've got the ring on the wrong nail," she said again. "There's 2 nails on that post. The low one was Elston's. The high one holds a coil of chain, and if you hang 19 keys off it, the chain sings all night." I said, "It does. I know it does." That was the first thing she told me, and it was worth more than anything else in the room. She could hear the shop. The 6 stack runs down through the building and out through the boiler room ceiling, and old cast iron carries sound the way a string carries it between 2 cans. She had been listening to that shop for years. She had heard Rudy hand me the ring in March and tell me the boiler was a bastard in the shoulder seasons, and she had heard him call me by my name while he did it. She had known my first name for 6 weeks, I had known she existed for 3 days. Then she said, "You turned my heat off." There was nothing in her voice about it. That's what I want to get across. It was the voice you'd use on a man who'd parked across your driveway. I said I had. Why? I wanted to know if somebody would turn it back on. She thought about that. Then she said, "You could have knocked." And she went and sat down at the card table. I have thought about that exchange more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. She was right, and it cost me nothing to be told so. Her name is Verna Ware. Elston was her brother. I got that in about a minute and a half, standing up, both of us awkward as neighbors in an elevator. And then she said, "Sit down. You're making the room small." And I sat in the chair that was always pulled out, and she took the one that was always pushed in. And that told me the seating in that room had been settled a long time before I got there. I asked her how long. She thought about it the way you think about a thing you have already counted. 11 years in June. I've gone over her account maybe 100 times since, and I still cannot find the place where it turns into a lie. It is not dramatic. That is the part people do not expect. She had an apartment on 4 in the old building, back when it still had the rent it had. And in 1974, the owners converted it out from under everybody, and the rent tripled in one letter. Most people left. She stayed on a lease that got worse every year for 30 years, working a hospital laundry, and then her hip went, and the laundry let her go, and the arithmetic just stopped working. She was 60. She had $400 a month coming in, and the building wanted $700. So her brother, who had run the place for the owners for close to 40 years, and had a set of conversion plans in his head that were not the plans on file, put her in a room that the 1974 drawings had turned into corridor. He said 6 months, she said. He said it the way people say it. I asked her the rest of it slowly, because I did not want to interview her, and because I did not entirely know what I was looking for yet. I only knew that a room does not run for 11 years on one man's goodwill without leaving marks, and I wanted the marks. I asked her who brought the food. Elston. Tuesdays and Fridays. 2 cans in each pocket and a coat cut for it. I asked her whether it was ever anybody else. She was quiet for a second, and that second is the reason I kept asking questions. "Twice," she said. "Not twice a year, twice in 11 years. She turned her cup around on the table. I'd hear the lock go, and no knock. And in the morning there'd be a case inside the door. Whole case, not 2 cans. I thought he'd sent somebody up on a night he couldn't come. I never asked, because if I asked and the answer was no, then what? I asked her when the heat had ever gone off. "Never," she said. 2 days, one time, winter time, a few years back. He came up in the afternoon, which he never did, and he told me to get in the closet and pull the door and stay in it, and he brought a chair in for me and a blanket, and then men worked in that wall for 2 days. I asked how many. 2 voices, maybe 3. One of them kept saying 6th floor riser, 6th floor riser, like he was reading it off a page. She said it the way you'd report a weather event. They had a torch. You can smell that through plaster. And on the second afternoon, the radiator came back hotter than it had ever been, and it never went back to what it was. I sat in a chair in a room that was not on any drawing, and I understood that at some point in the last few years, licensed men with a torch and a work order had stood 4 feet from a 70-year-old woman in a closet, and had been told 6th floor riser, and had done good work, and had gone home. Then I asked the question I had been circling, which was when she had last seen her brother. "The Friday," she said. "He sat where you're sitting, and he didn't take his coat off, which he always took off. And he said he'd been talking to somebody about getting it on paper." "Getting what on paper?" "Me." She looked at the boarded window. "He said, If it's on paper, it's somebody's. And if it's nobody's, it's mine. And I'm getting old. He died the following week, in the alley behind the freight door, at 6 in the morning. Understand what he did, because it is the piece I keep coming back to. Elston Ware did not hide his sister in a hole. He kept a unit alive. He left the riser branch open when the rest of the floor was valved down. He kept the cold water tapped in. He boarded the window from the inside, so the pane would read as vacant from the alley and never touched it from the outside, where a ladder would show. He hauled her cans 2 at a time in a coat with deep pockets, so a man carrying groceries into a building he worked in looked like a man carrying groceries. And he kept it off every piece of paper that exists. No work order, no purchase, no line item. He did all of it with his hands, on shift, alone, for 11 years. And then in March he had a stroke in the alley, and that was the end of the entire system. She said, "The heat never quit. That's what fooled me." That is the sentence I would put on the whole thing if I had to pick one. The heat never quit. Somebody kept that branch open after he died. She had been sitting up here since March, telling herself her brother was sick, because the building was still warm, and a building that is still warm is a building where somebody is still deciding to keep you. I asked her when the food stopped. "March," she said, "about the middle. There's 11 cans left downstairs. 24 in a case." She said it flat. "I know how many I've been taking. 9 days. That is what 11 cans is, at the rate she had been going, and she had been going at a rate she had set herself with a pencil. I sat in that chair, and I did the only piece of arithmetic that mattered, which is that I had eaten 13 cans of a dead man's plan for his sister, and I had thought I was being thrifty. I asked her, because I had to, whether she had ever been in the shop while I was asleep in the next room. "Twice a week," she said. "You leave the light on over the bench. You shouldn't. You'd hear better in the dark." I told her he was dead. I did it badly. There is no good way, and I did not find the exception. She nodded twice, and then she got up and put the kettle on the burner I had rewired, and she stood with her back to me while the water came up, and neither one of us said anything for about 4 minutes. When she sat back down, her face had been put away. "He'd have wanted the boiler looked at," she said. "It's short cycling." It is. You'll want to check the aquastat before you pull anything apart. That is a maintenance family. That is what they had instead of the other thing. Then I told her about Monday. The notice had gone up in the lobby the week all this started. A sprinkler retrofit ordered by the city with a start date and a contractor's name. I had walked past it 100 times. 2 days earlier, the crew had come through and chalked the 6th floor corridor, a straight blue line at 8 feet, running the length of the east wall, with tick marks every 4 feet where the drops go in. Right across the face of her room, through the plaster, through whatever furring is behind it, into a space the drawings say is solid. I got about 2 sentences into explaining it before I realized she was not receiving news. She got up and took a coffee can off the shelf and brought it to the table and put a folded piece of paper in front of me. It was a photocopy of the lobby notice, folded in quarters. No writing on it, no note, nothing on the back. "Under the door," she said. "2nd week of April. I thought Elston had left it before, and I'd only just found it, because that's the kind of thing you tell yourself." She tapped the corner. Then I read the date. I sat there with it in my hand for a while. Somebody had stood on that landing in April after the stroke, with a copy of a public notice in their hand, and had known which door to slide it under, and had known there was somebody behind that door who would need to know, and had put it on the floor and gone back down the stairs without knocking. "Monday," she said. "They start at the top and work down. 6 is Wednesday, maybe Tuesday. And you'd be the one to let them in. I'd be the one holding the ring, yeah." She looked at the boarded window for a while. Then it's not 11 years, she said. It's 4 days. We tried it that same night. I want that understood, because of what came after. Unit 408 has been vacant since January. It has a working toilet, a working tap, no lease on it, and no showings booked, because the company will not spend on paint. 2 floors down. 9 minutes of walking for a woman with a bad hip. All of it on the rear service stair where nobody goes. I went first with the flashlight. She came behind me with one hand on the rail and the other on my shoulder, and she moved better than I expected for about a floor and a half. We got to the 5th floor landing, and I put my hand on the door, and it did not move. It is a fire door. 1974, vintage, self-closing, self-latching, hardware on the corridor side only. It opens out of the corridor into the stair, which is exactly correct, because the stair is the way out of a fire, and nobody is supposed to be trying to get back into a burning floor. There is no knob on the stair side. There is no keyway on the stair side. There is nothing on the stair side but paint and one flat steel edge with no gap in it. Every landing in that stairwell is the same, top to bottom, except the 6th, where her brother had rehung a door backward in 1990-something, and nobody in 40 years had come up the back stairs to notice. Which means the rear stair goes exactly 2 places. It goes to her floor, and it goes all the way down to the basement, past every other floor, without opening onto any of them, and out through the freight door into the alley. I said something about how she'd been able to get to the laundry all these years, and not to anything in between, and she said the stairs were never the problem. I asked her what was. Going out isn't a door, she said. Going out is an address. We stood on that landing under a dead bulb, and she got her breath back, and then she said, "Well, then we're going to the alley." There were 2 ways to do it, and I knew both of them by the time we got back up the stairs. The first way is the right one. You call the county. There is a number for adult protective intake, and it is answered during business hours by a person whose whole job is exactly this. And she would have been in a bed with a call button by the end of the week, and none of it would have cost me $1. I found the number on a Thursday afternoon on the computer at the branch library on Fenner, because I did not want it in the history of a phone that the company pays for. I wrote it on the back of a work order in pencil. I carried that work order in my shirt pocket for 3 days, and it went through the wash once and came out legible, which felt like a comment. I dialed it Saturday morning at 9:10, sitting in the truck outside the market with the engine off. I got as far as the recording. There is a recording. It says the name of the department, and then it gives you an option to report a vulnerable adult. And while it was reading me the option, I was already doing the other arithmetic, the one where the report names the building, and names the man holding the keys, and names him twice. Once as the one who found her, and once as the one who found her on Tuesday and called on Saturday. Dolan gets a copy. The company in the other state gets a copy. I am 6 weeks into a job I got because the last man died, living in a basement unit that exists on the lease as a term of employment, with a custody agreement in a folder that has a fixed address written on the 3rd page. I hung up before the beep. I want to be exact about that, because it matters to me, and it should not be allowed to matter to me. I did not decide not to call. I called, and then I hung up, and then I put the work order back in my shirt pocket and drove to the 2nd way. The 2nd way is a boarding house on the north side that I knew about because a plumber I used to work with lived there for a year after his divorce. 12 rooms, shared bath on each floor, no application, no credit pull, no questions past the 1st of the month. $425 a month and first and last up front, $850. I had $1,040 in an account, and every cent of it was the deposit on the apartment I was supposed to move into in September, which is the apartment with the second bedroom, which is the apartment that turns every other Sunday into every other weekend. I did the arithmetic on the back of the same work order, which is a thing I would rather not have a physical record of, and then I threw the work order away, which tells you what I already knew about myself. I told her the boarding house was the plan, and I did not tell her the other plan existed. She would have taken the county. That is the thing. She is not a frightened woman, and she is not a woman who thinks she is a secret. She had spent 11 years in a room because the arithmetic said so, and if I had laid both options on that card table, she would have looked at them the same way she looked at the Aquastat, and she would have picked the one that did not cost the man in front of her anything. So I did not lay them out. I said there was a room on the north side, and it was ready Sunday, and I would drive her. She said, "What's it run?" I said the landlord owed me a favor. She looked at me for about 3 seconds longer than she needed to, and then she let it go. And both of us understood that she was letting it go, and we went back to talking about the boiler. Sunday, 5 in the morning. Not one of my Sundays, which is the only reason I could do it at 5 and be asleep by 9. You want 5, not 4, and not 6. At 4, the bar traffic is still coming home. At 6, the first shift is already moving, and Rudy sometimes turns up early to smoke in the alley. At 5, the block is nothing but the street light and a heat pump running behind the market. She came down the rear stair in 11 minutes with both hands on the rail and one stop on the 9th landing, wearing her brother's coat, because it was the warmest thing in the room, and because I think she wanted to. She carried a paper grocery sack with everything she owned that she cared about, and I want to say for the record that the sack was not full. I went ahead of her and put my shoulder into the freight door, which drags on the 3rd hinge and always has, and I held it open with my back the way I do when I am bringing in a water heater. She stopped 1 step short of the alley. She had not been outside in 11 years. I had not thought about that at all until I watched her not do it. And then I stood there, holding a steel door, and understood that I had planned every part of this, except the part where a person has to walk through a door. I did not say anything. You do not help with that. I just kept holding it, because that is the only useful thing a man in coveralls can do. And after a while, she stepped down into the alley and put her hand flat on the brick, like she was checking it for heat. Then we got in the truck, and I drove her to the north side and paid a man $850 in an entryway that smelled like other people's cooking, and she signed a card with her own name on it, which was the first document with her name on it in over a decade. The card has a line on it for next of kin. She wrote her brother's name, and then she wrote the address of this building after it, because it is the only address she knows, and she did it without stopping, and I stood there and watched her do it, and said nothing. She said thank you at the door. I said I would come by Thursday. I did come by Thursday. I have kept that up. That part is not the point of this. The point is what I did Monday morning before the crew got there. I stripped the room. I was on the 6th floor at 2:30 with a hand truck and 4 contractor bags, and I took it apart the way you clear a unit after a death, because I have done that too. The mattress went out the freight door and into the dumpster behind the market, not ours, because ours gets photographed for the property report. The card table and the 2 chairs went in pieces. The hot plate with my new cord on it went in a bag. The rug went in a bag. The cans came down to the shop and went back under the workbench with the other cases, all 11 of them, facing out, which is a thing I did, without deciding to do it. I pulled the plywood out of the window frame, and I set the sash back, and I washed the glass, both sides, so that from the alley the 6th floor east pane reads the same as every other pane on that wall. And then I did the last job, and it took 20 minutes, and it is the only part I could not finish. I went to shut the heat off. I already had most of it before I opened the wall, if I'd been willing to lay it out. It was the last week of April on a banked boiler, and one radiator in this building was running like January, which means somebody had made a decision about that radiator and made it recently. There was bright oil on a lock plate 6 weeks after the only man who oiled it was dead. And there were 2 days one winter with a torch in that chase and a voice saying 6th floor riser off a page, which means paper, which means an invoice, which means a signature. The branch takes off the 6th stack about 4 feet inside the wall, and to reach the takeoff you have to get at the riser from above, which means the mezzanine, which is locked, and which is on Dolan's key and not on mine. But you can see the takeoff from the 6th floor landing if you pull the access panel and put a light up into the chase, and I had never once pulled that panel because there is nothing on my punch list that lives in there. So I pulled it, and I put the light up, and I found what I found. The original takeoff is 1928 iron, and it is capped. Capped properly, painted over, 40 years of dust sitting on the paint. Somebody killed that branch a long time ago, exactly the way the drawings say it was killed. 6 inches above the cap, there is a copper T. 1/2 inch, cut into the stack, soldered clean. Not clean like a man in a hurry on a Sunday. Clean like a licensed hand, with a proper torch and a wet rag, and time to do it right. The flux was still bright at the joint. Copper goes brown in a boiler chase inside of about 3 years, and this had barely started to turn. Off the T, a run of 1/2 inch soft copper going east into the wall, into her room, into the 5-section radiator I had put a packing nut on, and on the T, 6 inches from the stack, a 1/4 turnball valve with a red handle. Open. You cannot reach that valve from the 6th floor landing. I tried, with my arm in the chase up to the shoulder and my cheek against the plaster, and I am 6'1". The chase turns. You reach that valve from the mezzanine platform, standing up with both hands free, and the mezzanine has 1 key and it is not on my ring. Here is everything that means. And then I am finished. Elston Ware did not solder that T. He was a maintenance man with a torch and a bad back, and he did his own work. And his own work is all over that building, and all of it looks like his own work. And Rudy told me in the alley over a sandwich that the man never touched wet in 40 years. That joint was done by somebody who does joints for money. Somebody paid an invoice. Somewhere there is a line item that says 1/2 inch T and 8 feet of soft copper on a 6-inch riser. 6th floor chase. And there is not one word anywhere on it about a room. And there is a woman who sat in a closet with a blanket while it was installed. And somebody after March, after the stroke in the alley, after the ring came off the nail and went into Rudy's hand and then into mine, went up onto that mezzanine with a key I do not have and left the handle open. The same somebody, or another one, oiled a lock on the 6th floor landing so it would keep turning. The same somebody, or another one, walked up the back stair in April and put a photocopy of a public notice on the floor and walked back down without knocking. They did not bring cans. They did not fix a cord that was going to burn her alive against a plaster wall on a floor with no sprinklers. They did not come up the back stair to see whether the woman on the other end of that copper was still eating. They kept the heat on. That is the whole of it. Somebody with authority in that building made a decision, every single month, to keep a room warm that was not on any drawing, and they never once wrote down that a person was in it, because the moment you write it down, it is yours. I stood on that landing with my arm in the wall, and I understood that I had not discovered anything. I had joined something. There had been a chain of men holding that valve open, and not saying the word, and I was the newest one, and I had held it open for 3 days myself while I ran the arithmetic on $850, and I hung up a telephone on a Saturday morning outside a market to keep my place in the chain. So I put the panel back, and I screwed it down, and I let the radiator in the empty room run. The crew came Tuesday. I let them on to 6 myself, and I stood there while a kid with a hole saw went through the east wall on the chalk line and found furring and lath and a plaster room with a clean window and nothing in it. And he said, "Huh?" And I said, "They closed that off in '74. And he wrote something on his tablet and moved 4 feet down the wall and cut the next one. Then I went down to the shop and I hung the ring back on the low nail, and I counted it, because I count it every night at the end of the shift. 19 keys, 18 locks. It is still 19.